The words sliced through her heart like a knife. "You're just a worthless old woman," her grandson hissed, his eyes full of contempt. For the first time in her 72 years, Grandma Evelyn felt smaller than dust in her own home. She had raised him, fed him when his parents were gone, worked 2 jobs to keep him in school. And now he stood there, looking at her like she was nothing but a burden. She wanted to cry, but she didn't. She simply sat there, staring at him, wondering how love could curdle into such cruelty. But as his words echoed in the silence of the house, another sound shattered the air. The heavy knock of police at the front door. In that moment, Evelyn knew the storm had finally arrived. The truth, the secret she had carried in silence, was about to unravel, and no one in that house would leave unchanged. Evelyn James was not a perfect woman, but she was a strong one. Born and raised in the Deep South, she knew the weight of struggle from childhood. Life had taught her to fight for every crumb, to love fiercely, and to sacrifice even when it hurt. When her daughter, Clarissa, passed away young, Evelyn did not hesitate. She stepped in to raise her grandson, Marcus. She poured her years, her energy, and every dollar she could scrape together into him. She worked nights cleaning offices and mornings in the cafeteria just to keep food on the table and books in his backpack. Every Sunday she prayed over him, whispering, "You will be the man this world needs, baby." But time has a way of changing people. As Marcus grew older, the boy who once hugged her knees after school grew distant. He rolled his eyes at her stories. He brushed off her advice. And when adulthood came, entitlement followed. Still, Evelyn loved him. She endured his temper, his cold words, even his ingratitude. Because love, for her, was not conditional. It was sacrifice. Yet sacrifice has limits. And when Marcus's bitterness collided with a truth Evelyn had kept buried for decades, their home became a battlefield. The night Marcus called her worthless would not be the end. It would be the beginning of revelations that would shake the foundation of their family forever. Evelyn's mornings followed a rhythm as steady as the ticking clock in her kitchen. She woke at 6, brewed her chicory coffee, and shuffled around her small but tidy home in her faded slippers. The house smelled faintly of lavender soap, the way she liked it. Marcus still lived with her, though at 24, Evelyn had hoped he'd be finding his own way. He claimed he was waiting for the right opportunity, but she knew better. He spent more time scrolling through his phone than looking for work. Still, she cooked him breakfast most mornings, grits, eggs, and toast, the same meal she'd made since he was a boy. He rarely said thank you anymore. Sometimes he didn't even come to the table, choosing instead to eat hours later, cold and silent. But Evelyn clung to small rituals. She kept his laundry folded neatly, left notes on the fridge reminding him of appointments, and slipped $20 bills into his wallet when she noticed it was empty. There were cracks, though, tiny signs of distance. He stayed out late, sometimes not coming home until dawn. She found receipts stuffed in his pockets from bars and clubs. Once, she even noticed the faint smell of something stronger than alcohol on his clothes. "Baby, are you doing all right?" she asked one evening, her voice gentle. "I'm fine," he snapped, brushing past her. Evelyn prayed harder after that. She whispered his name in church, tears staining her wrinkled cheeks. Yet she refused to believe the boy she raised could truly lose his way. She told herself this was just a phase, that love and patience would win him back. What she didn't know was that the cracks were widening, and soon the storm she feared would no longer be something she could pray away. It was already at her doorstep, waiting to strike. The night it all came crashing down began like any other. Evelyn sat in her armchair, knitting quietly while the TV hummed in the background. Marcus stormed in just past midnight, his eyes glazed, his movements restless. "Marcus," she said softly, "where have you been, baby?" "Don't start with me, Grandma," he muttered, tossing his jacket onto the floor. Her heart clenched. She hated the way he looked at her now, like she was some obstacle in his life instead of the woman who had given everything for him. But she tried, one more time. "You missed your appointment today. That job interview was important." He cut her off sharply. "Stop nagging me. You don't know what it's like out there. You're just some old woman sitting in this house, acting like you understand." Her knitting needles slipped from her hands. Some old woman. That's all he saw. "Marcus," she whispered, "I've worked myself to the bone for you. I kept you clothed, fed, in school. I gave up everything for you." He laughed bitterly. "And what do I have to show for it? Nothing. You didn't give me opportunity, you just held me back. You never told me about my real father, never gave me the life I deserved. You're worthless, Grandma. Worthless." The words struck harder than any blow. Evelyn sat frozen, her hands trembling. She wanted to scream, to remind him of nights she walked home at 2 a.m. from cleaning offices, of shoes she wore until the soles had holes so he could have new ones. But her throat was tight with grief. "Worthless?" she repeated softly, tears welling. "Yes," he roared. "I should have had more. I should have had the truth. Instead, I'm stuck here with you, wasting my life. You're nothing but dead weight." He shoved a lamp off the table, the crash echoing through the room. Evelyn flinched. For the first time, she was afraid of him, not the boy she had raised, but the man standing in her living room with anger boiling in his veins. "Get out," she whispered. "What?" "Get out." He sneered, grabbing his phone and slamming the door behind him. The silence that followed was heavier than any sound. Evelyn sat there in the wreckage, her tears finally spilling. Worthless. That word burned into her chest like a brand. But what Marcus didn't he know was that Evelyn carried a secret, a truth she had kept hidden for decades, a truth tied to his father, to the choices she made long ago. And now, with Marcus's anger spiraling out of control, she feared that secret was about to come crashing into the light. Hours later, when the heavy knock of police fists rattled the front door, Evelyn knew. The time for silence had ended. The pounding on the front door shook Evelyn's small house. She froze in her chair, heart racing, before slowly pulling herself up. When she opened it, 2 uniformed officers stood on her porch, their faces stern. "Ma'am," one of them said gently, "we're looking for Marcus James. Is he here?" Evelyn's chest tightened. "No. He stormed out earlier. What's happened?" The officers exchanged a glance. "We have reason to believe he was involved in a break-in tonight. Witnesses placed him at the scene." Evelyn's stomach dropped. "Lord, no," she whispered, clutching the doorframe for support. They asked if they could come inside. Evelyn nodded faintly, stepping aside. As they looked around, her eyes fell on Marcus's jacket, crumpled where he had thrown it. One officer bent to pick it up, and when he did, something metallic clattered to the floor. A knife. Evelyn gasped, covering her mouth. She recognized it immediately. It wasn't from her kitchen. Her heart sank deeper when one of the officers carefully picked it up. "This matches the description from the report," he said quietly. Evelyn's world tilted. She wanted to scream that this couldn't be true, that the boy she raised wasn't a criminal. But then she remembered the nights he stayed out, the smells on his clothes, the bitterness in his words. She had been denying it. "Ma'am," the officer said, "when your grandson returns, please call us immediately." They left, but their presence lingered like a shadow in her living room. Evelyn sat back down in her chair, staring at the knife on the table. Memories washed over her, of another man long ago who had walked this same path of anger and destruction. Marcus's father. The secret Evelyn had buried all these years. She whispered it into the silence. "Your father was no hero, Marcus. He wasn't taken from you unfairly. He was taken away because he was dangerous." Tears welled as she remembered the night, Marcus barely a toddler, when his father Charles had come home drunk, raging. He had raised his hand to Clarissa, and Evelyn had stepped between them. The violence escalated, police were called, and Charles was arrested. He never came back. Evelyn had chosen silence, never telling Marcus the truth. She wanted to protect him from the shame, to give him a clean slate. But the anger in Marcus's eyes, the cruelty in his words, it was Charles all over again. Hours later, Marcus stumbled back through the door. His face was pale, sweat dripping from his forehead. He froze when he saw Evelyn sitting there, the knife on the table between them. "Grandma, don't you say a word," she interrupted, her voice trembling with strength. "You think I'm worthless? You think I held you back? Boy, I carried you when nobody else would. I gave you more love than your own father ever could." He shifted, guilt flickering in his eyes. "You want the truth so bad?" She continued, her voice cracking. "Your father wasn't some lost opportunity. He was a violent man. He hurt your mama. He hurt me. And I stayed silent so you could grow up without that shadow over your head. But look at you now, walking the same path. Anger, violence, disrespect. You're turning into him." Marcus's chest heaved, his eyes filling with something he hadn't felt in years. Shame. But before he could respond, the sound of sirens cut through the night. Red and blue lights painted the walls. The police were back. Marcus's shoulders slumped. He knew it was over. As they placed him in handcuffs, Evelyn's tears streamed silently. She didn't fight, didn't beg. She simply whispered, "Maybe this is the only way you'll learn." For the first time in a long while, Marcus didn't argue. His eyes met hers, soft with regret. But regret had come too late. The house was quiet again, but Evelyn's heart was anything but. She sat alone in her armchair, staring at the empty doorway where Marcus had stood. The word worthless still echoed in her mind, but she no longer carried it like a wound. She knew the truth. She had given everything she could. Sometimes love isn't enough to save someone from themselves. Sometimes the hardest act of love is stepping back, letting consequences teach the lessons words cannot. Evelyn whispered a prayer for Marcus that night, not for freedom, but for wisdom. For him to see that the anger he carried was destroying him, just as it had destroyed his father. The moral is simple. Never mistake sacrifice for weakness. The people who quietly carry us often hold the greatest strength. And when we call them worthless, we only reveal how blind we've become.